can't hold an election, on the front lines of a war. That doesn't work. It's, something this country knew very well during the Second World War. We didn't hold an election. We waited till the war was over. And yet he's going ahead. Why? Because he wants it for propaganda purposes.
Why is Putin running as an independent candidate? What does that mean in relation to Russia's government?
Well, it's fascinating because for the last, X number of elections, he has, of course, been the United Russia candidate, which is his political party. But I guess what he's trying to do here is, given that this is his umpteenth election, and don't forget he's changed the constitution numerous times to enable him to keep on running. I think what he's trying to show is, I am the father of the nation now. I'm above party politics.
Above everyone.
Above everyone, above everyone. I'm not tarnished by this war. I'm not tarnished by what's happened over the past, kind of a year or two. You know me, you trust me, I will deliver for you, and I don't need a political party because I'm Vladimir Putin. It's a Putin party.
And how will the elections work in terms of does anyone opposing him have any chance? She rather naively asks. Of course they don't. But sort of how much does it have to appear that other candidates who put themselves forward have a chance? If you see what I mean, do they have to look like they're playing by the rules, Alan, or does all that just get thrown out the window?
Well, it sort of already has been thrown out the window because obviously for the election to be effective, he should be running against people who might have a chance to beat him. And of course, Alexei Navalny, his chief critic in Russia, is locked up in prison and, is not going to come out anytime soon. So he's not going to be on the ballot. There's an ultra-nationalist.
We don't know where he is, do we?
No one knows.
Navalny.
No one knows. No one sort of knows. He is alive still. That much is obvious. There was a little stunt that his supporters pulled this week, where they basically put billboards up in lots of cities that pointed to a Russia without Putin. But the reality is he's not on the ballot, and neither is the ultra-nationalist to Putin's right, Igor Girkin, who's also been kept in prison for longer. So yeah, there'll be some candidates, Kate, but it's rather like sort of that episode of Blackadder when it's a rotten borough and all these random candidates run and there's only one victor. We all know the answer.
I love that on Saturday, more than 700 politicians, figures from the sporting and cultural communities in Russia, met to endorse President Putin's candidacy. That's what Russian news agencies were reporting. Pretty not damning, but 700 of them coming out in support of him. I was also reading out about Boris Nadezhdin. He's promised to take on Putin in the presidential election. He's a veteran politician and commentator. He understands the risk, but he still wants to run. He's been speaking to NBC's News. He says he's ready for anything, and he's one of only two people who've so far expressed a willingness to actually stand up to President Putin. And that's a good point, isn't it? I don't know if you know much about Boris Nadezhdin, but by putting yourself up against Putin, you're presumably putting a bit of a mark on your head, are you? I mean, anyone who opposes him, as we know from other recent examples, puts himself in danger, really.
Yes, they do. But of course, as always, how Putin perceives you is how you get treated. Yes, going against him is one thing, but firstly, you've got to sort of wonder how serious the bid is, and secondly, if he was in any danger, Putin, of actually needing to stuff the ballot more than necessary, you can be certain that criminal charges would appear and something would happen to stop anyone from doing so. Look, the reality is this is a completely corrupt, sort of process. It's not an election. It is a selection with only one real choice. And all of Russia knows this. Anyone, sort of running against him, great credit to them for putting their heads above the parapet, but they're not going to win, and everyone knows that. So in reality, this is just part of his, his show business style when it comes to this election.
What about the territories which are disputed between Ukraine and Russia? Alan, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, those areas where Russia at the moment lay claim to, but they are disputed. Some of those territories, of course, Ukraine very, very clear that they want to take back before any kind of war is over. What happens in those areas? Will polling go on for Russia within them?
Oh, totally. I think, look, let's be clear. These are not disputed territories to anyone other than Mr. Putin. Everyone else in the world thinks these are Ukrainian territories that he's invaded. But yes, he will attempt to, as he's done in other places, he will attempt to hold, kind of phony ballots there. And he will use his resounding victory as firm evidence that these parts of Ukraine always were part of Russia. They support him, not, President Zelensky. And as a result, he will, use anything he can to try and gain extra legitimacy and extra support for his position. But look, the world knows the truth. You can't have a ballot in a war zone, and yet he's trying to do it. So we all know what the outcome's going to be.
I mean, a significant number of people in those territories, do speak Russian, do declare that they are Russian. We mustn't, sit here and presume that they're all desperate to belong to Ukraine, because that's not the case, is it, Alan? So they will be willing participants in this.
I'm not so sure that's correct, Kate. It's very difficult in a case where that may well have been true prior to the invasion that Putin did. But I'm pretty sure that what Putin's invasion did was to kill, even among Russian speakers, if you like, in Ukraine, the idea that this man is really their guarantor. Yes, there'll be some people who go along with it, of course, but just because some people go along with it because there is sort of the power of the bayonet, as it were, at their throats, does not make it an election. And realistically, you and I both know you can't hold an election, on the front lines of a war. That doesn't work. It's, something this country knew very well during the Second World War. We didn't hold an election. We waited till the war was over. And yet he's going ahead. Why? Because he wants it for propaganda purposes.
There was a statement made on X, formerly Twitter, by the Ministry of Defence, the UK's Ministry of Defence. And they were talking about methods which will be used during the Russia elections, electoral fraud and voter intimidation in those temporarily occupied areas that we've been discussing. How does what does that look like in real life, if I'm to get you to just expand on some of those tactics used, Alan?
Well, funny enough, you can see some of this stuff already in pictures from previous elections and videos. You see great, examples of ballots actually being stuffed. If you cast back to the previous election, you'll see it in action. So, the Russians aren't even hiding what they're doing. But in these territories, what it will involve, of course, is firstly immense pressure on people. They'll be told you must come out to vote because, of course, don't forget, a low turnout is also damaging. If 20% of people came out, it shows they're not with Putin after all. So they will be whipped out, basically. They'll be, kind of forced out in every which way. They'll be cajoled, they'll be bribed, whatever it is, they'll be taken to go there. And then essentially they'll be told in no uncertain terms, we know how you'll be voting, so you better vote the right way. So it's and finally, of course, as I just stated at the start, if for whatever reason they feel that not enough ballots are going in for Putin, he doesn't win a resounding enough victory, they will either stuff the ballot there and then during the election day itself, or wait till afterwards and do that. So basically, any which way that you can corruptly influence an election, they will do it.
Okay. All right. This comes in contrast, doesn't it, to Zelensky, who is deferring his elections because of the war going on. Are there optics at play here? Putin, trying to make Russia look like a democratic country by staging his elections in contrast to what's happening with Zelensky?
Well, as I stated earlier, the reality is that democracies don't usually have elections during wars. That's what we did not do during the Second World War when we were, sort of knife against throat. We decided it was sensible not to do that and instead to wait until the war was won in order to do it. So I can totally understand why Zelensky is not holding an election when you've got, forces on the front line within Ukraine. And of course, on the other side, yes, what Putin is simply trying to do here is not necessarily show he's a democracy, but that he's popular. All he wants is a boost to be able to show to people, look, Russia backed me, or, the territories in Ukraine back me. So it's less about, sort of democracy, although they'll go through the motions, and more about this is my popularity being cemented by the people. Because right now, there's obviously a fear within the Russian high command that people are not actually with him necessarily on the war. So he wants to be able to show a resounding victory so that he can, kind of show to the world, I'm not going anywhere. I've got their support.